On the podcast today, we're going to speak about the nature of thoughts and how they create the illusion of the ego. Now, this is some of the deeper knowledge we discover in Taoism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. So this is a very deep dive today and a subject that a lot of people don't even know about or have never considered. So we're talking about the nature of thoughts themselves. And, ordinarily we think of thoughts in the sense that they are all linked together and we have this certain train of thought that's just the nature of the mind. But the East have a different approach to this. And one way that this is exhibited is the spiritual master or someone who has gone very far on the spiritual path. A lot of people will ask me, or even you, do they still think or do they have thoughts? And yes, they do, but their relationship with thoughts are completely different. Yeah. And it comes down to an understanding of the nature of thoughts themselves, which we don't ordinarily consider, because our mind is in this habit of linking the thoughts together, which essentially creates this illusion of the ego that we believe we are.
Yes. The thought itself is just kind of arise itself without we noticing it, right? That's why when you say linkage of thoughts itself may be kind of unheard of for a lot of people, I think, because thoughts just arise and then you just keep following through the thoughts, and then next minute you arrive at something completely unrelated from where you began, right?
Yes.
So just to think of linkage of thought itself, you have to be pretty advanced practitioner in spiritual path, I think.
Definitely.
Because most people are very unconscious in their own thoughts, so that let's start with something like drinking a cup of tea, for example, and the taste and smell may bring up some sort of memory, and that connected to next phase of thought, and that connects to the next phase of thoughts. So before you catch it, you may arrive in somewhere completely different chain of thinking, which is completely unrelated to a cup of tea, for example, right? So again, that is somewhat nature of mind itself, I think. When if you are completely unaware of that, you are just kind of swamped within your own thoughts, and like you're basically dreaming.
Yeah.
You're completely out of that present moment.
So this is how the wandering mind is developed. Exactly what you're saying. Like this linkage of thoughts that we will talk about today is how actually the wandering mind functions. So when you wander with your thoughts, you're following the thought, which turns into another, which you begin this train of thoughts. But is this the way that thoughts naturally arise? Are they dependent on each other, or are they independent? Are they separate? You see? And this is the difference, and this is what we'll get into. And so, like with a master, thoughts persist, but they don't really, what could you say? They don't have a strong sense of ego identity because they don't follow the thoughts, and essentially they don't have a wandering mind, which is what differentiates them from all of us mere mortals, where we continually follow our mind and then we'll be daydreaming for half an hour, and you know what I mean? Like that's the habit of the mind, and we will talk about the habit of the mind later as well. But so what the differences between the East and, let's say, the West and the modern world is that, let's say the East as well these days, include them in the modern world, is that they don't think of thoughts arising, like you said, spontaneously of themselves. They think of thoughts in this sort of linear progression that are linked, right? And so the East is saying that's actually, the great Eastern knowledge is saying that's actually not how thoughts arise. They arise one at a time, like this, like anything else in nature. But what we do is we link the thoughts together, and then we start to create this train of thought, which creates this personality, and then off down the rabbit hole you go.
Yeah, so some of the thoughts themselves just arise of itself, so that it's completely independent of what you were doing or where you are or something like that, right? Course, yeah. And then the train of thoughts develop from there unwillingly, and end up you completely get lost in their thoughts, so that in the end you kind of make up your own story,
Yes.
your own version of a certain story out of that train of thoughts,
Yes.
which that you unwillingly you are linking those thoughts, but at the same time, instead of you choosing look away and not giving too much attention to the thoughts, you choose to keep thinking.
Yes. Yes.
You made that decision
Yep.
unconsciously to keep going down to that rabbit hole of thinking.
Yes.
That's where that story, that's where that train of thoughts comes about. And again, like you said, that creates in the end your sense of your own persona or ego.
Yes.
And that process becomes more and more often every moment, every day, right? Then that idea of ego, idea of who you think you are becomes much more solid, right?
Yep.
And in the end, that idea of who you are determines your behavior, determines your way of thinking, judging yourself, and how you look at other people and things like that.
Yeah, it's all based on that. You think of your thoughts in a sense, in that way, like the ego sense, the linkage, like dominoes. So they depend on other thoughts. So, like this, right?
Yeah.
But what the East is saying is that the nature of thoughts, they don't have this link.
Right.
So they're like this, they're not dominoes. So this is what they would call the unsupported thought. It's not supported on anything. It just arises like the sun rises in the morning.
Like a bit like random.
Random, yeah. Because if you look, especially if you look into your subconscious, a lot of thoughts in that arise from the samskaras, the subconscious, are random. It's not of your own volition. They just sort of pop up like plants pop up out of the soil. You're not saying, get out of there and start growing. Like it just happens. And so this is what would be called the unsupported thought. And so this is what in the East they would call like non-dual thoughts or non-dual thinking. So, which we'll get into a little bit later, especially the non-dual thinking aspect of it, and actually what breaks this linkage up, which we'll get further down. But that's kind of become the habit of let's say an untrained mind, or a mind that's accustomed to the social world, right? Because socialization teaches you to constantly link these thoughts and go through this process, which creates this sense of person, but all that's happening is the dominoes. There's just like this. And so things that cause the linkage are things like we were talking about, the subconscious. So the samskaras, vasanas, and karma. So vasanas being habitual tendencies, and karma being your action or unconscious actions, but also muscle memory as well, all contribute to this kind of linkage, because we'll feel a familiar thought and then follow that, link that thought to past memories, you see, and the next minute you've gone down that rabbit hole of thinking, and often we're going through similar patterns of behavior because of that process. You know, so that thought will arise, and then the memory will connect with that thought, and the next minute the same pattern of behavior unfolds, and then you wonder why am I like caught in this crap again? Like,
it's going through that endless cycle.
Yes.
Again, that's lack of awareness, lack of knowledge on yourself, and these deep thoughts, things like that.
Yep.
And you said in Eastern perspective, the thoughts arise themselves of its own, and they are unsupported. But then, what would you say the perspective of the Western world or modern way of thinking, how the thoughts arise? And
well, they don't think about it. So because they think that's the way that we naturally think.
Okay.
So what we're doing in the East is we're peeling layers back, getting down to the subtlest elements of like, how do thoughts arise and this and that. There's not really that sort of study. Like, it's not.
There is no such like mind science. I guess mind science from a West we can only think of like psychology,
Well,
psychiatry.
neuroscience and
that sort of thing.
cognitive science, there's only 3 or 4 disciplines that are really
But then
interested.
that again came from, let's say, Freud was the father of psychology.
Yeah.
Then it came from very, very late in considering the Eastern ancient wisdom, because as early as late 1800s.
Yeah.
That's as early as we can
Yeah.
go back, I guess, in the West.
Well, a lot of the study of thoughts and that can, especially in the West, comes from felt experiences, and a lot of these studies, and especially where they're behind, is the studies of the subconscious and aspects like that, where the East has already had probably 3,000 years head start, so hence you and I are talking about this knowledge today, right? So it's not, the thing is that the West would just consider that, or just take it as on face value, that thoughts themselves are all linked together in, as we hear all the time, a train of thought, right?
Yes.
But we could change that to a chain of thought if we want to really. Yeah. But the great Eastern knowledge is saying that there's no chain, and thoughts bubble up independently of themselves.
So that in the West, I guess the deeper contemplation or study on thoughts or mind in general never been there.
No.
So like you said, in the Eastern philosophy, it started much.
Well, especially what we're talking about, because it's such a subtle subject, and it's such a subtle understanding that only, let's say, individuals like Gautama the Buddha or Lao Tzu would investigate.
Yes.
Would investigate the nature of their mind and the nature of how thoughts themselves function and operate, especially in relation to the subconscious muscle memory, and just like thoughts naturally of themselves as well. Just because they're, like you said before, that sometimes there's thoughts that we will have that in some sense are not related to a sense of ourselves, so to speak, and that's what a lot of people don't consider as well. A lot of people have a lot of thoughts that are in some sense not related to their experience. That may have came from some other experience that they had with other people, or someone else's experience that has kind of embedded into your samskaras, and so those thoughts themselves are not really a part of your own felt experience in life, or your own internal experience.
And I think the problem is that when these thoughts arise randomly, the problem is that before we get into the process of thinking, we judge that thoughts as my thoughts, that because that came in your head,
came in your head,
exactly, so that you think that my thoughts, it's mine, this sort of idea, and that kind of tricked you to judge yourself certain way, judge others in certain way, which creates the big misconception of things, and I think that leads to this false idea of who you are and ego and things like that, and also happens that way.
I heard a teacher in the East, and I can't remember who said it, but they said, most of your thoughts are not your own. And that's something for a lot of us to contemplate. And there's a lot to that. If you look at the subconscious, if you look at the experiences that you have, you might have had an experience where you objectively saw something, where it was something for someone else or to other people. But because your subconscious is always turned on, then, that's in the store bank, and then maybe that's going to bubble up one day, and that's going to affect your perception of reality, because a thought will come related to that, and then you link to that, and then next minute you're off down the rabbit hole again. But it was based on a thought that was not even part of your own real felt experience of, your own immediate reality. You objectively saw it, or you heard about something. And so that, like what I said, that teacher in the East, saying that most of our thoughts are not our own. And there's a validity to that, right? That we have to consider. So,
and I think actually most problem comes from that idea.
Yeah.
My thoughts.
It's my thoughts, yeah. It's happening within me, so it's that.
Yeah.
But is it really? Like if you're walking around and you see a street sweeper, are you the street sweeper because you see the street sweeper? It's the same sort of analogy, right? Like, because you see the street sweeper. So are you having the same experience as the street sweeper? That's my experience. And it's like, no, it's not. That's the street sweeper's experience. You're just seeing it. Same with your thoughts. These thoughts are arising. Are you seeing them, or are you following them and wandering with them, creating this linkage?
Yeah.
And so that's where all the problems begin. And so the thing is that it's like thoughts themselves are not the problem. And this is what we need for people to understand, because thoughts always persist. It's the habit of our mind to link the thoughts, which then create this sense of ego, because we create these train of thought that creates the personality. Like, it creates this solid sense of self that wouldn't ordinarily exist if we understood that the thoughts are just arising like this, not like this.
Yeah, again, we give too much attention to those thoughts, right?
Yep.
And that's how we create our own version of reality and story, which is most cases actually completely unrelated to what's really happening, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And we get lost in our own thoughts, and we believe in that. It gives too much power to those thoughts. That's where all problem begins.
Yes. So it's just that it's the mind's habit to follow those thoughts, and we'll get into why the mind does that in a minute. But like, we have to really emphasize that it's like this linkage up in the series of thoughts creates a sense of persona, right? And so whereas the sage somehow unlinks these, or doesn't operate from a function of a linkage of a series of thoughts, and they have this reality of non-duality, which is different to us. And all it is the difference between linking the thoughts and understanding that thoughts themselves are unsupported. So if you have one thought, that doesn't mean it's going to be related to the other thought, and so forth and so on. But you're linking the thoughts, and you're connecting it with memory or past experiences, and then, or as you said, you're connecting it with as if it's something about you, but it was just like just a random occurrence, but you thought it has something to do with you. So this continuity of thoughts creates this illusion of the self, right, or the ego, to be precise. And it's that continuity of thoughts that we become addicted to. And because of the linkage of thoughts, this continuity, this thought stream that becomes ourselves, in air quotes, is what we become addicted to. And this habituation we have to link the thoughts and to follow this thought stream that creates this sense of person that we think we are, where we drag the one thought out and we stretch it right out and we say, this is who I am, this is how I think, this is my perspective of the world. And it's like, no, you're only linking thoughts. It's only a continuity of thoughts that's creating this sense of ego. And so what we have to then do is think about then what causes the linkage, right? Before we look at solutions. And so why does our mind need to link thoughts together in the first place?
Well, why does it do it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Because in the end, like, essentially our mind lacks nothing. It lacks nothing. That's the power of the mind. But we've succumbed to this habit.
I don't think we are aware of that. We forget or never knew about it.
No, of course. Well, like you mentioned with the West and their studies of thoughts themselves, this is kind of not considered, what you and I are talking about, because it's you have to have a different perspective of consciousness itself, a different perspective of how thoughts arise, instead of like thoughts that are in this train. What you're doing is actually you're stretching one thought out and you're linking it up with other thoughts and memory and past experiences and so forth and so on. And so a lot of people aren't really studying this from an Eastern perspective as we are doing today. They're studying it more from the cognitive science perspective or neuroscience or psychology, those three disciplines in particular. But so what causes the linkage of thought? So we have to really dive into the second noble truth of the Buddha. So the second noble truth is the cause of suffering is craving, right? But craving's kind of it's an interesting word for the second noble truth, like, because to be more accurate, we should be talking about seeking itself, right? Because what we're talking about is more than physical desire here. Like the craving is at a very deep level, and this is what the Buddha was explaining as well. So what we're talking about is seeking. So we need to ask the question: is why does the mind seek? Right? If the mind itself is completely lacks nothing, right? Then why does it seek? And so why it does this is because the mind itself is, especially when you have no awareness within yourself, it's trying to fix itself and find a secure home. It's trying to solidify itself. And the reason why it does this is because the nature of the mind is empty, spontaneous, and free. That's the nature of our mind. It's empty, spontaneous, and free. But the nature of the way that we think, and the nature of the world itself, and the feedback we're getting from the external world and this and that, is that we ought to fix our mind in a certain perspective. And this is when your mind is conditioned, right? Because you built the house. This is my religion, this is my nationality, my gender, my views on politics. You've got the bricks up, they're strong, they got the steel, the Rio in them, and it's not getting knocked down anytime soon. So the mind is trying to fix itself, right?
Yeah, that's the funny thing, isn't it? Like you said, nature of mind itself is empty and spontaneous, formless.
Yes.
But because of this immediate environment that we are in, it says something completely different.
Yeah.
So that, let's say, what kind of degree you have, or what, I don't know, what kind of salary a year you make, and this and that. So these things came into our life, and to judge a value of who you are, so that we're trying to solidify our own self in that accord, right? So that's why I think we get into this endless cycle of feeling empty, because we keep chasing.
Yes.
Instead of being content with being empty and spontaneous and just this formless and this such freedom there is, that we can, if we really try to attain it, then there's such enjoyment in that. But some reason we are very fearful of that state of mind, right? Why? Because it feels so insecure not to have some a solid idea of who you are because of the society.
Yeah. Well, you said it. You said the chasing, right? Essentially, the seeking to be someone, to fit in a accord. But as you mentioned with emptiness, constantly when the mind has a fixed place, it's not satisfied, it moves on. It's constantly trying to secure itself.
Yeah.
And we are uncomfortable with the emptiness, the emptiness of our mind. And so because we lack the awareness to understand our mind at a deeper level, we constantly go through this process of trying to fix the mind and build this house in our head. But what happens constantly? We always want the next thing, thing. We're never really secure with where we're at, because it's a bottomless hole.
Yes.
You're trying to it's a bottomless pit. The mind is completely empty. You can't build a house for it. You can have all of these conceptual frameworks, all of this conditioning, but you're still going to want that new BMW. You're still going to want the next woman or man. You know what I mean? It's never, without the awareness and without coming to the sage's understanding of the unsupported thought, you're constantly going to need the next thing. You're never going to find contentment
That's it. In that way, I don't think we can ever be satisfied.
No, definitely not.
So that looking for satisfaction in that way itself is wrong.
Yep.
I think.
Yes.
Whereas if you go the other way, complete opposite way, and you try to stay empty and simplify your lifestyle, and you desire less, you crave less.
Yes.
And it's not easy, but once you try that, then you get to that stage of that somewhat satisfying, which is the sense of contentment.
Yes. We're uncomfortable with that formless, empty reality of the mind. You know, we're really uncomfortable with it. So we're constantly always trying to fill it up. And again, as you were mentioning about contentment, we feel the need to validate our existence, you see, because we're not comfortable with that empty state of mind. So we follow the thoughts, we build this sense of personality, we get the BMW, we get all of these things, but we're never content. But we're constantly in this process of trying to validate our existence. Yeah. But in the end of the day, it's a process. The process is self-deflating because you can't ever solidify yourself because that's not the nature of the mind.
Exactly. In that way, you never will be able to get rid of the feeling of being like empty. Like really the empty feeling, like what life is about. Like when that feeling will never go away unless you stop chasing, stop seeking the next pleasure, next object that you think that might make you happier and things like that. Because once you have it, let's say, once you have that BMW brand new car, there is that like indescribable empty feeling, like it's just like that empty feeling is completely dissatisfied feeling, you know, and that's what people often don't understand, or they do feel that empty feeling, but they don't know why it is. They don't know why, yes, right? Yes. Because, like I said, that way of looking for satisfaction itself is not correct.
No. Yeah. And we've all bought a car, and after it, we have a bit less money, and then even though we desired it, what happened in the end of the day? You suffer, as the Buddha was teaching. It's you know, craving, seeking. I mean, same, right? But it's that habit of seeking. You see. And this is the same with the linkage of thoughts. It's a constant process of seeking, right? It's this habit that we've got our mind into, and this is why the Buddha keeps saying, like, seeking leads to suffering. As you mentioned with the car, you spend all that money on the car. You got the car. You finally got it. You should be celebrating. Yes. You know, if we live in that reality from the previous perspective, right? But then once we have it, I mean, we're like, oh, well, I have it now. Like and it becomes
what's next?
And it becomes background noise. Yes. Yeah. What's next? Yeah. What's next? Right? Like, oh man, I might get a big exhaust on it, or I might. Oh, maybe next year I'll sell this and I'll get a Ferrari or something. You know what I mean? Like you're already off in the future.
That's right.
So the process of your ego or the self is constantly deferred to some sort of future date, right? And so, and that's the bad habit of the mind is this seeking. And if you have no awareness of that, then you'll keep being hostage to that seeking habit. Yes. And this is again, as you mentioned before with Western science, this is what they're sort of not looking at in regards to thoughts because of not many traditions would consider like Buddhism or Taoism or Hinduism as valid sciences on their own. They wouldn't, right? You know, because they're sort of too intermingled with spiritual attainment. And, you know, so they try to fully distance themselves because of science's relationship with the Abrahamic religions, but you know the East is a completely different beast, as we know. Yeah.
Again, speaking of the habit of the linking thoughts and habit of looking for fulfilling your craves and desires and whatnot, is it in a very, very subtle way, in the process of that, is in our mind and the brain that there's that, you mentioned this earlier before, that there's something called muscle memory. Like this, our nervous system in our brain, just like our when you work out, like when the muscle that gets used getting stronger and stronger. So this is biologically already there. It's already set you to have that sort of habit. So it is pretty difficult process to break that muscle memory, right? But that's where, again, this Buddhist or ancient Eastern wisdom training comes into place, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like that's how to break that linkage of thoughts, how to rewire your muscle memory.
Yes. And we'll get into that a bit later, especially because that's, well, the practices, the spiritual practices and this and that are about...
break that.
It's like spiritual solvent, right? Like to get rid of this adhesive that's bound this thing. But before we get into that, what I want to also say is that, especially in relation to the seeking and the relationship of the thoughts, right, is that the ego, tries to deny its emptiness by grasping the next thought.
Yep.
Which is similar to, what we're talking about with the cars and, trying to get the next thing. So it's trying to deny its emptiness by grasping the next thought because it's uncomfortable with that feeling of shunyata. And that just comes from a lack of understanding, a lack of training of our awareness. Because when we're brought into this world, our pure awareness, we're told, you better get into school and you better this is how you do things. It's linear and so forth and so on. But the world is not like that, as you know. Nature is not like that. And so the Eastern traditions are not linear, So the thing then is that when you're in that habit, then the ego is constantly thrust into the future, as I was mentioning before, right? So the self or the ego is that which is constantly deferred. So it's constantly that which is put off. You're constantly in this process of stretching this train of thought out and creating this sense of person. So, and it's just an uncomfortability with the actual emptiness, the empty, spontaneous, and free nature of the mind.
Yeah, that's something completely different from what they're used to.
Yes.
Right? Completely unfamiliar with. We are so accustomed to keep accumulating things like material possessions or your thoughts in whichever way to fulfilling your desires and cravings. So we are so used to doing that, right? So we would keep doing that regardless of the fact that that's fulfilling you or not.
No,
Only because it became your habit.
Yes.
You keep doing it without any reason, basically, because you don't know anything else than that way.
Yes.
Right? We were so trained, so got used to living that way, and our parents lived that way. So we never got introduced to any other way to go about, right?
No.
So that instantly, when you hear someone says that you need to empty your mind, you need to, cleanse your thoughts.
You're a nutbag.
You need to simplify your life and things like that. But although the people would see some benefits of doing that, instantly, like you said, they will feel so uncomfortable and insecure, I think.
Yes.
So it's just uncomfortable. It's just something completely different. You just stop collecting things, right? So that you feel just very that unfamiliar territory, that uncomfortability.
Yes.
But that's actually good direction that you need to take.
Yeah. Well, insecurity is a perfect word to use because, like, the problem in the mind, and like from our parents and everyone suffers because of this, is that the mind thinks its fundamental task, or, you know, because of how we've been trained and habituated, it thinks its fundamental task is to find and dwell in a secure home for itself. That's what it thinks.
Feels like settled.
Settled. Yeah, that's
settled.
Perfect.
Settled.
I have everything. Yeah,
Yes.
I have everything. But then what sits in the background? A deep longing for something else, a sense of sense of adventure or something else.
Always there's something else.
Something else, yeah.
That way,
Yeah, you know what I mean? So, like, it thinks that its fundamental task is to find this secure home for itself and to dwell in it. But what the East are doing is they're talking about this non-dwelling perspective. So essentially you're homeless in your mind. So you throw the ego out, you stop thinking in this way, in this chain of thoughts, and you become comfortable in this non-dwelling place. So you don't have a dwelling, there's no house built in your mind, you're not following the next thought after the next thought, you're just shanti, you know what I mean? You're just, I'm good, you know what I mean? I'm comfortable in emptiness. Like you were saying, like, you know, you need to empty your mind and this and that. It's frightening for people, sorry love, it's frightening for people because they're not comfortable in the non-dwelling aspect. They need a house in here. You know what I mean? Everything's almost equated to the external world. I need something in here. Like I got to have some opinion. I got to think of.
That's right. That's some sort of fixation in your mind. You need something, right?
Yeah.
And that again boosts your ego.
Yes.
And that makes you feel secure.
Yes.
Because your ego feels secure.
Yes.
Yeah, I just thought that otherwise, actually, because Zhuangzi, in story of Zhuangzi, there's many good stories, but like the butterfly story, like I'm maybe oversimplifying here, but and then we might want to talk about in depth in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
The moment that Zhuangzi himself was looking at butterfly, that very moment he himself became the butterfly, right? So in that analogy, what I really like is that our ego, our mind always wants fixation. Our thoughts want to be settled at somewhere, right? That gives you sense of security, gives you sense of identity, right? And it gives you a sense of idea of who you think you are, right? In that sense, you feel safe. Whereas where Zhuangzi is coming from is that there's none of that.
Yeah.
Because he knows that's an illusion. The illusion of our own, I don't know, thinking.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
It's deluded mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? But he puts in the butterfly story that in that moment, I'm like a butterfly. I'm free like butterfly. I can fly everywhere like butterfly in that moment. And next moment, you're something else. So it's that free and easy wandering, which is completely different in dwelling in thoughts. Yeah.
And dwelling in a belief system.
Yeah. So in that sense, the mind is complete in that its own nature, which is free, empty and formless.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So in that way, you can be completely free, and only from that way, I think you can be fulfilled and have that sense of satisfaction and contentment.
And that's how you begin to witness the unsupported thought.
Yes.
Because you're comfortable, and this is where the sages are different, you're comfortable in that space. So you see the thoughts. And that's interesting. But that's all that's a reaction. It's not the wandering mind. It's not, see, if you have a dwelling, that's familiar, I go with this.
It's more temptation.
Temptation, yeah.
Whereas once you begin to notice that you are in that split second that you are trying to link the thoughts, right? Like, oh no, I'm not gonna go there. So you begin to be able to notice when these thoughts arise.
Yes. Essentially, the truth is that in saying all that, the mind truly does want itself, but we're in this bad habit, right? We're in this bad habit of following the thoughts and so forth. So it's actually the linkage of thoughts that eclipse this from happening, from the mind residing in its non-dwelling nature, right? And so if we don't have this complete understanding of how thoughts arise and the unsupported thought as opposed to the linkages of thoughts, and being comfortable with the mind's empty nature, then we'll never experience that, because we'll always be in this process of linking the thoughts, and then next minute this can't happen. So basically what the mind is trying to do is it's trying to grasp itself, and in trying to grasp itself, it creates the ego. So it's trying to objectify itself. It's trying to create this dwelling, because it's in this habit of seeking, and then we create the ego, right? And so
it's almost in that process in your own mind, through the chains of thoughts, you create in your mind, you create this being, and you, that's me.
That's me, yeah.
Like this.
Yeah. The mind, is trying to fix itself.
Yes.
So that's how it tries to fix itself. It creates the ego. But like when you put more awareness on it, and you start to unlink the thoughts, then you get comfortable with the non-dwelling nature. The problem with this process is, like, in having this ego, it gives this kind of security, right? Like you said before, like we feel like this and this and that. But this comes at a tragic cost, because fear is generated at the same time. And why fear is generated? Because anything that grasped can be lost. It can be lost. So this is what happens with death. See, we create this ego, right? And so we're in this dwelling place in our mind, right? And what happens at death? Death's coming, and that house is getting burnt down that you built. No matter what you think, it's gone. It's going. It's going. And so we suffer immensely, because we've grasped this, sense of self that's come through this linkage of thoughts from our wandering mind, and building this process of ego. And then when we are grasping that, when it's getting taken away, like anything else, we suffer fear.
Yes.
And this is the big detriment to this whole process. If you're in your non-dwelling nature, this is life. What comes, and this happens. Like not that a sage or a master doesn't feel the pain of death. Of course they do, but their experience of that is completely different.
I find it a little bit sad, to be honest, how much people don't want to, or don't think about their own death. I think that's sad.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Because if I were to say to just any average people, they're like, oh, that's a little bit too much of a heavy topic, isn't it?
Heavy lifting, huh?
Yeah, I can understand where they're coming from, but that's something like, I don't know, blind spot, or just a kind of elephant in the room kind of topic that no one wants to approach, because, again, because it's so fearful, right?
Yep.
But matter of the fact, like, as much as we hear someone else dies, we ourselves gonna have to face it one day as well.
Of course, yeah.
And in that way, and actually only that way, we will be able to see ourselves much more honest way and transparent, and also we might get some sort of message in a way like how to live our own life.
Yes.
Right?
And when it comes, if you follow what we've been talking about today, the fear won't arise, because you're not dwelling anymore.
Yeah.
You are residing in the non-dwelling. You've got over your own uncomfortability of your own mind, and you're not associated to your thoughts. You're not associated to the sense of self you have. You're going to be just like the wind. When death comes, you'll be just like the wind, free.
So, I mean, that's such beauty to me.
Yeah, of course.
That's just the beauty of life as a human being, I think.
Well, that's the ultimate spiritual process for anyone who's into especially deep spirituality. It's about freeing yourself from any sense of karma. And it comes from the non-dwelling place, from not solidifying yourself. See, that solid house, that thing's getting burnt down, but the remnants of that, the foundation, is probably going to live on in another form. And so do you want to live on in another form, or do you want to fully merge back with the source, to use Dao's terminology? And so what you ought to do is you got to come back to Zhuangzi's zero perspective, which is this non-dwelling place.
Yes.
And when you're in the non-dwelling place, fear doesn't exist.
Yes.
Fear is what is a result of this process of dwelling in your mind, of creating something that doesn't actually exist. You're grasping something,
Yes.
you're holding on to it. And, what happens when you hold on to something for too long? You get tired and worn out.
That's right. You do get worn out.
You get worn out. And then what happens? And eventually you have to let go anyway.
Exactly.
And we need to, like you were mentioning about death before, like we always have to contemplate our own mortality, because all things, not always, but I'm saying it's good to contemplate that, because all things do pass eventually, and you are a part of nature as well. Things are just coming and going in nature. It's the way it is. We don't see it a lot like that because we don't have much of an objective view. We only really see from our own subjective experience. But ants are dying right now, birds are dying right now, humans are dying. Everything is coming, new lines are being born, other lines are dying.
Yeah.
There's this whole constant process going on. And it's a beautiful thing when you understand it. But it's not a beautiful thing if you're in your dwelling mind. It's like, because then you start to think, oh, well, why me? And why did they have to die? And this and that. It's like, it's nature. There's a beautiful thing to it. Like, it's been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, very long time.
Just because you're here with your Google and this and that, and you're trying to overcome these things, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Whatever it has a beginning, there's the end.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
That's just
And there's a beauty to that.
fundamental truth, yes.
When you read a story, right? If the story never ended, would you keep reading? You'd be just like, chapter 1000. Okay. Just keep going, like, but there's no end in sight.
And like you said, because there is a beginning and end, and there is a beauty in it, I think.
Yeah, of course there's a beauty
And
in it.
only that way, I think, we can see what the beauty is in individual's life,
Yes.
or just a life in general.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the beauty can be witnessed when you are not in that, when you are in the process of the non-dwelling
Yes.
aspect. You can see the beauty because you're not reacting to thoughts, you're not reacting to a sense of self, you're not grasping anything in your mind. You're witnessing the beauty. Can you witness the beauty? And the witnessing the beauty means that your mind is unpolluted. You can witness the beauty in anything, just like the hum of a city. You can look outside and you can witness. I mean, hard to imagine for a lot of people, but you can still witness the beauty in something so chaotic.
I think it's maybe necessary that 2% of our mind has to always have that sort of perspective on death. Like what has beginning, that has ending.
Yeah,
as
for sure.
And that gives you always in a good place and having a good level of perspective in things, I think.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. And so in saying all that, we got to come to, obviously, what are the remedies for this bad habit of mind to try and fix itself, the linkage of thoughts, creating this fake sense of self, the ego. What are the remedies? And obviously, when we look into the deep traditions, meditation is obviously a remedy for a lot of reasons. And, also within traditions, especially like Zen, have a direct impact on this habit of linking the thoughts as well.
Yes.
Like what you mentioned earlier about the spiritual solvent. Like meditation is like the spiritual solvent on this habit where like that's glue, right? Like this chain is like rock solid, but then you throw on meditation and then it breaks up this chain.
Yeah, with the complete irrationality.
Your complete irrationality, yeah. Essentially, like in Zen, right? It's completely
like,
irrational. Yeah. Because in Zen, especially, you're trying to break up the train of thought, right? You're trying to break up the train of thought. And this is what I really love about Zen. And actually this is also the wisdom of prajna in Buddhism.
Yes.
Where prajna means like sort of like this higher wisdom, right? Which is attained not through like a train of thought. It's attained through sort of a process of being immediate and appropriate, which relates to Zen koans and Zen tradition, and also martial arts and Taoism and Vedanta and these paths.
And that, I think, prajna also derives from a place where like mind is always in motion. Like it's not dwelling on anything.
No.
It's always in motion, move with like energy or flow of I don't know where you are or how you feel, and this in motion.
Yes, of course. So before we get into the meditative aspect, we'll talk about like Zen and Zen koans. Like, so to break up those like that thoughts, right? Like, so actually the unsupported thought was actually the inspiration behind the development of Zen and Zen koans, because of the understanding that thoughts are like this.
Yes, right.
You know, so, and Zen is about how do we get people's mind back to that natural state?
Yeah.
Well, we give them these crazy stories, and you know, we train them this way through meditation strictly, and then what does that do? It makes people act immediately. Immediately, right? In the beginning. The prajna aspect is when you act appropriately to the situation.
Oh, okay.
That's the higher aspect, see?
Yeah, okay.
But at the beginning, you're trying to get the students to act immediately.
Immediately.
Because you know what happens? See, the thing is the hesitation, which is where once you're hesitant, that means that you're thinking. In a logical train of thought.
Yes.
That means you're thinking from a person, from a self. And so what does the koan do? You know, like the koan of the water, the pitcher of water, you know, this is a pitcher of water, but you can't call it a sandwich. And the other guy, one guy goes, well, I'm probably butchering this, but you can't call it an omelette. And then the master's like, what? And then the other guy just knocks the pitcher over and walks away. And he's like,
that's exactly what.
So that's see, the idea is that the other guy was too contrived. He thought a little bit about it, tried to be a little bit witty.
Okay.
Where the other guy
look for the right answer.
The right answer. Where the other guy's just like, whatever. Like, there's no right answer to this. Just knock it over. I'm out of here.
Complete nonsense.
Yeah, just nonsense.
Yeah, complete nonsense.
But like, you know, in the story, it's illustrating that individual understood what Zen is. He understood how to act immediate to a nonsensical thing. So when you hear that story, even when you hear it from objectively, like anyone listening now to you and I would think, it doesn't even make any sense. And that's the point. It's supposed to get you out of the logical train of thought. Because, like, you know, the thing is that when there's hesitation, that means that there's a logical train of thought, and that there's also this self-conscious paralysis of thought. You're paralyzed by thinking. Because you're in the habit of thinking like this. And so when someone says to you, what is the Buddha? 3 pounds of flax. And you're like, what? Like, that's the hesitation. You're paralyzed by thought, see? You're thinking rationally about something that's irrational. And so that's what the process. That's why Zen approach it this way, because it was developed on the unsupported thought, the understanding that thoughts arise just like anything in nature. We are in the bad habit because of the mind seeking to drag the thought out, to try and build this future self that we think we're going to be once we have the BMW and the house and, you know, all of the riches and whatever in the world, but it never comes.
And again, I think that reflects on the westernized way of thinking, I think.
Yes.
We try to make sense of things, right? So that we try to think logically and also very linear sense as well.
Yes.
And we don't embrace that randomness. Whereas in Zen, specifically, they understood the nature of thoughts which arises of themselves
Yes.
on its own, which is completely unsupported in its own nature, so that they created something like koan, which is brilliant,
Yep.
using that unsupported thoughts and to train people to stay in that state of mind,
Yep.
to acquire that immediacy in that moment.
Exactly.
You ask a question, you need to answer straight away, no hesitation, right?
You can't have any thought conflict with your immediate response.
Yeah.
You can't, right? Like, there's a lot of situations we have in life where someone will ask you something, or they will, need you to do something, and then your thoughts kick in, and there's already hesitation.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not what the person asked you. They just asked you to get this done. And you're already like, dropped your lollies. You know what I mean? Like, you don't know what you want to do.
That's why when I hear these like Zen koans and things like this, so for me personally, especially even more, feels so refreshing. Because as you know, like now not so much, not as much I should say, but how indecisive I used to be. Because
Everyone is well.
Well, that's true. Under certain, like a very strict education system which I came through, always looking for answer, which has to make sense logically, right? And that training has been very, very, obviously over the years became very solid and heavy. So that embracing this randomness of thoughts and acquiring that immediacy, which is it's very creative,
Yes.
and actually very refreshing.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because, like, in the Zen temple, you're praised for your immediacy, and in education system that we all came through, we get mocked. You ought to think about it, overly think about it.
Bad student,
Troublemaker. Troublemaker, yeah. He's a troublemaker, or she's a troublemaker, and it's like, what? Like, they are just reacting to what is there. And this again relates to Zen and martial arts and Taoism are so intertwined, and also the yogic traditions in India are all intertwined in this sense of acting immediate and appropriate. Like if you look at martial arts, if we look at Kung Fu, if someone's going to throw something at you, and you sit there and go, why not time it will get here, and
how can I
act towards this movement he is doing? And it's like,
too late.
And it's gone. You're already you're on the ground,
knocked out,
picking up your teeth. So it really relates to that. So you need to act, and again, like especially in martial arts, it's the prajna aspect is in that as well, where you need to act appropriate to the situation, which comes later. But you ought not to act with any hesitation, because that's where trouble occurs. And that's what makes an expert martial artist, or anyone that's involved in any sort of internal cultivation. You can't have any of this hesitation. You have to throw yourself into the practice. Mistakes will happen, so forth and so on. It happens, right? But if you have the hesitation, then you're going to come across a lot of problems.
Yes.
And that's the really the crux of Zen in relation to like the linkage of thoughts, and why the Zen koan and martial arts actually help. Like training in martial arts helps you with immediacy, because you have to train your physical body, and in training your physical body, you're training your mind in tandem, right? Because there's no separation in reality because cognition is embodied, but you're kind of training your cold cognition to get accustomed to this new environment. And then once it becomes second nature, then this environment becomes anything. You can just, unless the other person is more highly skilled, but still you can navigate through the environment at a decent level, But if you're not accustomed to that, then you'll just be on the ground, knocked out or choked out or what have you.
Yes.
So, and again, in a lot of modern disciplines and even sports themselves, they don't think about things in this way, because they don't think about, they're definitely not talking about the unsupported thought, but, you know what I mean? Like, they're not talking about it at like anything at this deeper level. So, but this is getting into where the spiritual how the spiritual masters still think, but they don't follow the thoughts. And so, as we were mentioning with, especially with meditation, right? Meditation, the deep meditation here is the remedy for this, and inquiry and contemplation are the remedy for ungluing these linkages of thoughts. And it's a no-brainer, right? Because when you, like if you look at open awareness meditation in Zen, you're observing the thoughts. And what do you do when you observe the thoughts? Because they arise on their own.
Yes.
You isolate it. And once you isolate the thought, it begins to go down. And another thought will come. You isolate it. And then what do you notice? You notice sometimes that when one's arise, sometimes you drift with it.
Yes.
And so there's this constant process of sometimes you get it, sometimes you drift.
Yes.
And the more you notice it and it evaporates, this is when you're starting to harness more of the understanding of the unsupported thought. But the more you're possessed by wandering with the thoughts, that still means that you still are in this habit of the linkages of thoughts. And that's not anything right or wrong. It's just the way that we've all been raised. Because our teachers, particularly our parents and our family and the educational systems, we're not talking about these sorts of things.
Nah.
You know what I mean? We're not talking about like how to be immediate and spontaneous, and we're not talking about how nature is spontaneous. Why aren't we spontaneous? Why are we all riddled with thoughts and paralyzed by our own thoughts and so forth, right?
Yeah, that's the beginning of effort.
Yes.
Unlinking the thoughts.
Yes. Yes.
And we need to, although we sometimes drift, that was pretty tricky. Like, gotta be a little bit,
Yeah.
To take it as a bit lighthearted, a bit soft, a bit embrace that part of yourself as well sometimes, and just get back to your breath or your sensation of the body or something, and just get back to work, And it definitely requires a bit of effort, but again, like after a certain level, like it gets easier and easier and easier. Again, once it gets easier and easier, that means in your brain, your the muscle memories start to unlinking that old habit, right? So that it's a process of retraining your neural network.
Yes. Yeah, they talk about the sticky mind, like what you were saying, like it's the thoughts that are sticking. They're stuck together. And so what does this cause? It causes a mind of hesitation, of deliberation. So,
yeah, right.
Because it's all stuck together.
Yeah.
But then once you meditate at a deeper level, you start to unglue this.
Yes.
Then you have a mind of no deliberation.
Yes.
Like they talk about in the Eastern traditions. Part of the end goal is this mind of no deliberation, where you just act and it's appropriate. You act, it's immediate and appropriate. Boom, boom. What do you need? Here, bang, gotcha. And there's no thinking. There's no prior thinking.
You're kind of expressing it just right away.
Right away, yes. And when we talk about deep meditation here, we're not talking about like all of these new entrepreneurial ways of like just 20 minutes and this. And I'm not saying 20 minutes meditation is not beneficial. It is beneficial. But if you want to get into the deeper layers, like what we're talking about, you got to go beyond 30 minutes regularly, but anywhere between 45 minutes is probably the sweet spot, but at least a couple of times a day, at least, and if you're lucky enough, you have more time and you can do more. But what this will do is it'll really impact this way of the stickiness of the chains being stuck together, the linkages being stuck, and you'll be able to start to then witness the beauty. You can't witness the beauty because the chain is tight and the glue is tight. But once you meditate more, you start to unglue these, and you can actually start to think in a non-dual sense, like a sage, and have that experience of non-dual thoughts. So meditation brings us back to the mind's natural essence, which is empty, spontaneous, and free. And as we were mentioning, deep meditation for obviously not just one time, prolonged period of time, brings us back to this empty, spontaneous, and free nature of the mind, right? And so that's where you begin to realize that our thinking is essentially non-dual. You see, it's essentially non-dual. It's not this act of duality where it's all linked together and it all depends on each other. It's all independent and it's just random, and it's not, there's no like solid sense of self within yourself. There's the empty nature of the mind, and you can either get comfortable with that non-dwelling place, or you can fall for the mind's trick and build this temporary dwelling in your mind.
Yeah. Again, it's hard process, isn't it? That's dwelling mind. And that thinking itself is non-dual. That's pretty revolutionary to me. Because when we embrace that true nature of thoughts, which is unsupported and pure in its own self, and empty and spontaneous and free and formless, right?
Yep.
And once we embrace that and we practice when thoughts arise in this way, then the process of thinking itself will completely non-dual.
Yeah.
And that is, like you said, yes, that's what sages experience thoughts.
Yes.
They do have thoughts, and they do think at times.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But that process of thinking is completely different from us linking thoughts.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The master essentially frees themselves from the linkage.
Yeah.
So where they realize the nature of the mind, that's the difference. They free themselves from the linkage. So we are hostage to the linkage.
Yes.
Because we're in that process.
Yeah.
Constantly. We constantly find ourselves in that process. But they free themselves from that to realize that the mind is empty, spontaneous, and free. And they're fully comfortable in that state. That's the difference. That's the differences between a master and everyone else, is that they are comfortable there. We are not comfortable there. It's that simple. Like you said before, if you mention to someone, you just got to empty the mind, this and that, it's uncomfortable for people.
Yeah.
Because that's not what their mind is accustomed to. But then once you apply deeper practices of meditation to your mind, and start to contemplate things like Zen koans and this and that, you are retraining your mind to be natural again. And the mind's nature is empty, spontaneous, and free. It's not a dwelling place. It's not a place that was designed for you to create something, even though the mind's habit is always, in a sense, trying to seek to fix itself. But as we mentioned earlier, what it's really trying to do is discover itself.
Yeah.
But if we haven't got the right information at our hands, we think that, we just got to build a house in our mind, and we got to have beliefs and opinions, and this is what keeps us safe. But this is not any sort of security. This is actually insecure.
Yeah. Again, that's just a deluded mind.
Yeah, deluded mind, yeah.
Isn't it? You got tricked by your own thoughts in the end.
100%.
And you identify with it, and you think that is you, who you are, and that's what you really want. And then you were completely gone the other way. Whereas a sage's mind, there is no such ideas in their thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely freed.
Yeah, completely free from
the linkage, freed from this illusion of self or ego, whatever you want to call it. And that's the process for all of us.
It's in the process of unlinking, not linking the thoughts. Is that you need to slow things right down, isn't it? Because thoughts are going from 0 to 100 in split seconds. Because when you were daydreaming, for example, what was I thinking? And then you just look at the time, it's only been 5 or 10 minutes. It's like this. It happens so quickly if you don't catch it and if you're completely unaware of it. So again, meditation helps that a lot, I think. Yes. It slows down your speed of thinking, I think. Because when you are completely empty and tranquil, then you concentrate on your breathing and the sensation of the body, it feels like you are in that gap between the thoughts, like a kind of pause.
Yeah.
And obviously our ultimate goal is that pause become the permanent stoppage, right? Or that when thoughts arise, it's much easier to notice it, right? So that you just slowing down the process of thinking. Especially nowadays, it's very difficult. Why? Because we have these such advanced technological devices, and we can touch you already from here to there, or you're completely stationary, but in your mind you traveled 100 miles an hour, right?
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, so that's why we always like fidgeting, and we always like thinking about 10 different things in a few minutes, and that's why we feel so anxious and all these things. So that slowing down the thoughts, slowing down the thinking itself, that can be a good start, I think.
Well, that's what I like what you said, because the thing is that, as you know, anyone who's a long-term meditator understands that your thoughts do diminish. Though not that they fully disappear, but they do diminish, and like it's like a master's mind is like having a pot plant that doesn't have any weeds that grow up. You know what I mean? Like no weeds come. So their mind, because their mind is through meditation and through awareness of their mind, it's not a place that a lot of thoughts grow naturally. But if your mind is in a process of constant seeking, then it's a place fertile for weeds and everything, banana trees and anything can grow there. A rainforest, you know what I mean? Everything can grow on just this little pot plant. And that's the difference, right? Because the average individual is not putting their awareness on their mind and understanding the deeper process of how the mind operates, and the second noble truth of the Buddha, right? Like of this idea of craving and seeking that the mind gets in, but you can free yourself from that when you put your awareness on that. Instead of just letting the mind do its thing, it needs a little help to understand that the mind really wants itself.
Yes.
It doesn't need to fix itself and find a secure home. It needs to remain in its non-dwelling reality. And that's how you can experience life without any hesitation, with immediacy, and also appropriacy, like with prajna. You're appropriate to every situation. So you're experiencing life and it's in all of its splendor without your mind getting in the way of the beauty of the experience. Yeah.
Something I really liked, that what you mentioned in one of the video about on ego, like nature of mind is empty and spontaneous, just like nature of the world. So when you understand the nature of mind, you will understand the nature of the world, which is oneness,
Yes.
a complete non-dual
Non-dual,
formless.
Yes.
So something. So once we understand our own mind, then we can truly understand the world.
The world, yeah.
Accordingly.
Yeah.
I really like that.
And both are the same,
Yes.
as you said, right? As I said, but as you...
As I read, I guess.
Yeah, but they're both the same.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty about it, isn't it? Yeah, people. We just don't consider it, that's all. We look at it, especially in the external world, right? We look at the external world and we think it's a certain way. And it's not a certain way. It's the same when we look in our mind, right? We think it's a certain way. It's not that way. It's only through awareness and through observation of yourself. And also, in doing that, then you have keen observation of the external world, and you understand that both realities are same. Empty, spontaneous, and free.
Free, yes.
It's the mind in its seeking handicap that makes the world the way it is, and makes our life the way it is.
Yes.
But if we, as you mentioned, we free ourselves like the master from that, then we can fully experience the beauty of the world.
Yeah, that's right. That original beauty of the world as it is.
As it is.
Mm.
And that's the same in our mind.
And again, as you mentioned about the fertilizer before,
Mm.
like so when we have a clean, fully clean, purified fertilizer, so that we can only grow the plant that it's supposed to grow, right?
Yeah.
That's the kind of process that we should also go through,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Through this meditation and Zen, all these spiritual practices.
Yeah. You're tilling the soil. You're
Yeah.
keeping everything all good, all shanti. You're not allowing the world to take hostage of your mind and drag you down blind alleys where nothing is there really for you.
Yeah.
You know,
You don't get sidetracked.
you don't get sidetracked. Where spiritual practices are about trying to come back to that non-dwelling aspect in the mind and feeling comfortable in emptiness. It, as you mentioned, it's scary for most people, but that's the spiritual journey for all of us.
For everyone, really.
Yeah. In our own way, through our own path, that's the ultimate realization, to get comfortable with that. Then you start to acquire the mind of a sage, which is actually just the natural state of mind.
Yes.
It's
that's
not
right.
it's not something that the sage owns. It's the natural state of mind, but it's a non-dwelling state of mind.
We all have it, right? We all have it, but again, our upbringing and cultural things and environment and whatnot and polluted it. And at the moment, it's just full of dust on top of it. That's all there is. We all have it. And
Clean it.
yes, all we need to do is just to give an effort to clean it and let it bring out and to shine it out in the world.
Yeah, it's there anyway. It's there anyway. It's just a matter of a reorientation.
Yes.
Like you said, you just dust a little bit here and there, and you see it, you know it, you feel it, you abide in it. That's your reality, because that's what's there. That, what we talked about today, the dwelling aspect, the house that you built, that's not always going to be there, and that's always changing according to whatever you are seeking next.
That's right.
But
That's
when the search is up, as Ramana said, once you stop the search, all good.
Yeah.
Shanti.
There's not a thing.
There's not a thing, yeah. Not a thing to get, not a thing to acquire, not a thing to be.
Yes.
You already are.
Exactly. You already are.
So guys, I hope you enjoyed this podcast today, and we'll see you guys next time.